I sat alone on that hard plastic chair at the Boston bus terminal, my arthritic fingers trembling as I read the text message one more time. My eyes weren't what they used to be, so I had to squint at the screen of the phone my grandson had insisted I get to stay connected. Grandma, please don't come to my graduation tomorrow. Mom says you're not welcome. I'm sorry. Those words from Mason felt like a physical blow, as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it burst. 16 hours on that cramped bus from Charleston to Boston, changing 3 times, barely sleeping, just to reach this moment. My legs still ached. The smell of diesel fuel clung to my clothes. And now this. I looked around at the bustling terminal. Young couples laughing, families reuniting with hugs, business people striding purposefully toward their next destination. And there I sat, a 71-year-old widow, invisible to everyone, with nowhere to go. My son James hadn't even had the courage to tell me himself. He'd made Mason do his dirty work. Or more likely, Victoria had orchestrated the whole thing. My daughter-in-law had been working to erase me from their lives for 20 years. I guess she'd finally succeeded. A memory flashed through my mind. Mason, at 7 years old, gap-toothed and beaming as he showed me his science fair ribbon. Grandma, when I grow up and become a famous scientist, you'll be sitting in the front row at every award ceremony. His little hand had clutched mine so tightly then. What had happened to that boy? What had Victoria done to him? I felt the first tear slide down my cheek before I could stop it. I quickly wiped it away with the sleeve of my best blue dress, the one I'd bought specially for the graduation. The fabric still had the store's starchy smell. I hadn't even removed the tags, planning to return it if it got wrinkled on the journey. Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need assistance? A young security guard had approached, looking down at me with that particular mixture of concern and pity reserved for elderly women sitting alone and crying. That look. I'd seen it too many times since Harold died. Poor old lady. Needs help. Probably confused. I straightened my spine, summoned my dignity, and smiled up at him. I'm perfectly fine, thank you. Just resting before I head to my hotel. Hotel. What a joke. I had reserved a room at the Holiday Inn near the university. 3 nights at $189 per night. Nearly a month's worth of grocery money. A reservation I would now have to cancel. The guard nodded and moved on, already forgetting about me. That's how it had been for years. People looking through me, past me, around me. My son forgetting to call on holidays. My opinion dismissed at family gatherings on the rare occasions I was invited. My Nora Victoria making snide comments about my clothes, my home, my southern accent. Just a simple country nurse, she'd once whispered to another mother at Mason's high school graduation. James married down before he knew better. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this simple country nurse had built something remarkable after her husband died. While they thought I was just scraping by on my pension, I had been quietly, methodically turning Harold's life insurance money into something substantial. Property by property. Investment by investment. Decision by careful decision. Wait until they discover who just donated the new science building to Boston University. I pulled out my other phone from my purse, not the basic model they'd given me to stay connected, but my real phone, the one Victoria and James knew nothing about. The one I used for my business dealings. 3 missed calls from William Foster, the university president. 1 text. Mrs. Harrington, everything is in place for tomorrow's surprise announcement. Please confirm when you arrive in Boston. I took a deep breath and texted back, plans have changed. We need to talk. Hey there, I know you're enjoying this story, but could you take a quick second to subscribe to our channel? I'd love to know where you're watching from. Just drop it in the comments below. Now back to what happened after I got that heartbreaking text. I stepped outside the bus terminal into the humid Boston summer evening. The city lights glittered against the darkening sky, indifferent to my pain. I hailed a cab, not to the Holiday Inn where my family thought I would stay, but to the Ritz-Carlton where William Foster was waiting to finalize tomorrow's announcement of the anonymous donor who had given $12 million to fund the university's new science building. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I felt something shift inside me. 25 years of being the dutiful mother-in-law, of accepting slights and exclusions with a gracious smile, of diminishing myself to avoid Victoria's jealousy. It was enough. More than enough. When we're too afraid to stand up for ourselves, we're teaching others it's acceptable to disrespect us, Harold used to say. My late husband had been gone for so long, but his wisdom still guided me. I pulled out a small, worn photo from my wallet, Harold and me on our wedding day, so young and full of hope. "I think it's time," I whispered to his image. "Time they learned who I really am." The cab driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Did you say something, ma'am?" I met his eyes with a calm determination that surprised even me. "Just that I've been invisible for far too long. Tomorrow, they would all see me, really see me, and nothing would ever be the same again." The Ritz-Carlton lobby gleamed with polished marble and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the bus terminal I'd left behind. The concierge approached immediately, his practiced smile faltering slightly at my travel-worn appearance. "Mrs. Harrington?" he asked, recovering quickly. "Dr. Foster is expecting you. Please, allow me to escort you to the executive lounge." As we rode the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. My silver hair had escaped its neat bun during the long journey. The wrinkles around my eyes seemed deeper tonight, carved by years of silent hurt. Yet there was something else there too, a fire I hadn't seen in my own eyes for decades. William Foster rose when I entered the lounge, his tall frame and distinguished gray hair commanding the room. For 7 years, we'd conducted our business through lawyers and conference calls. This was only our third face-to-face meeting. "Evelyn," he said warmly, taking my hands. "I've been looking forward to tomorrow. The board is thrilled about the announcement." He stopped, noticing my expression. "What's happened?" I sank into the leather chair opposite him, suddenly feeling every mile of my journey. "My grandson sent me a text. I'm not welcome at the graduation. Apparently, my daughter-in-law has decided my presence would be inappropriate." William's face darkened. "That's preposterous. You're the reason half those students can afford to be there tomorrow. And yet, here we are." I pulled out my phone and showed him Mason's message. William read it, his jaw tightening. "This is unacceptable. I'll call your son immediately." "No," I said firmly. "You won't." He looked at me, confused. "But surely, for 25 years I've lived in the shadows of my own family, accepted scraps of their attention, made myself small to accommodate Victoria's ego, watched as she gradually poisoned my relationship with my grandson." My voice remained steady, though my heart raced. Tomorrow was going to change everything anyway. Now it just changes, differently. I outlined my new plan to William. With each detail, his eyebrows rose higher, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with newfound respect. "Most people would just be seeking revenge," he said finally. "This isn't about revenge," I replied, smoothing my crumpled dress. "It's about truth. It's about legacy. It's about a 71-year-old woman finally remembering her own worth." William nodded slowly. "I'll make the arrangements." Back in my suite, a far cry from the Holiday Inn room I'd canceled, I ran a hot bath and tried to wash away 16 hours of travel. The bathroom was bigger than my entire kitchen back home. As I soaked in the scented water, memories flooded back unbidden. James at 8 years old, climbing into my lap after a nightmare. My son, who now couldn't even call to uninvite me himself. Mason's first steps, toddling across my living room floor while James and Victoria argued in the kitchen about how long they should stay. Victoria's cutting remarks at Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. "I don't think Evelyn needs any more pie. The buttons on that outdated dress are already straining." The way James had laughed nervously instead of defending me. The water grew cold as tears slid silently down my cheeks. Not tears of self-pity, I was done with those, but mourning for years lost, for relationships damaged beyond repair. I'd stayed in the background, made myself invisible, convinced it was for the best. "Keep the peace," Harold used to advise when his mother and I clashed. I'd applied that lesson too broadly, for too long. My phone chimed with an email notification. William had moved quickly. Everything was set for tomorrow. As I prepared for bed, I opened my suitcase and removed the gift I'd brought for Mason, a vintage watch that had belonged to his grandfather. Harold had worn it every day of our marriage. I'd had it meticulously restored, its inscription polished until the words gleamed. "Time reveals truth. Choose wisely how you spend it." Would Mason understand the message? Would he ever wear it? Or would Victoria ensure it ended up in a drawer, forgotten like his grandmother? I placed the watch on the nightstand and pulled out my reading glasses and worn Bible, the one constant companion through all my lonely nights. It fell open to Proverbs as it often did. "The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Tomorrow, there would be no more lies, no more hiding, no more diminishing myself. I slipped between the luxurious sheets, exhaustion washing over me. Before sleep claimed me, I whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for courage, for wisdom, for hearts to be opened, and perhaps, though I barely admitted it to myself, for reconciliation. Because despite everything, they were still my family, my son, my grandson, and even Victoria, the woman who had worked so hard to erase me, was still my daughter by marriage. God had carried me through Harold's death, through years of loneliness, through building a life and fortune alone. He would carry me through tomorrow too. Whatever came next, I was ready. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains as I applied my makeup with careful precision. I'd woken at 5 a.m., years of nursing shifts having permanently altered my body clock. Today wouldn't be the celebration I'd imagined, but it would be momentous nonetheless. I selected the outfit I'd purchased for this trip. Not the blue dress meant for sitting quietly in the audience, but the elegant cream-colored suit reserved for the donor announcement. Its price tag had made me wince despite my wealth. Old habits die hard when you've spent most of your life watching every penny. My phone buzzed. Another message from Mason. "Grandma, did you get my text? Please don't show up today. Mom's really serious about this." I felt a pang in my chest. No apology. No explanation. Just reinforcement of my exclusion. I set the phone down without responding. Words wouldn't matter now. Only actions. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock came at my door. Olivia Parker, my best friend since nursing school, stood there with a determined expression on her lined face. She'd flown in from Charleston last night at my request. "You look like $1,000,000, she said, embracing me. Or should I say 12 million? I managed a smile. "Thank you for coming." Wild horses couldn't have kept me away. She examined me with keen eyes. "Are you sure about this, Evie? There's no going back." "I've been invisible for 25 years, I replied, gathering my purse. "That ends today." The university campus buzzed with excitement. Families streamed toward the main quad where rows of chairs faced the elaborate stage. I spotted James and Victoria immediately, my son handsome in his dark suit, my daughter-in-law resplendent in an expensive designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. They hadn't seen me yet. From our hidden vantage point near the administrative building, I watched them greeting other parents with practiced smiles. Victoria's hand rested possessively on James's arm, her diamond bracelet catching the sunlight. They looked perfect, successful, untouchable. "The golden couple," Olivia muttered beside me. "If only people knew how she treats you." "They will," I said softly. Soon enough, William Foster approached us, dignified in his academic robes. "Everything is prepared, Mrs. Harrington. Are you ready?" I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You'll be seated on stage as planned," he continued, "as a special guest of the university. Your family won't know why until the announcement." We followed him through a side entrance as the ceremony began. From my chair on stage, partly obscured by a large floral arrangement, I had a perfect view of my family in the third row. Victoria was checking her phone, barely paying attention to the proceedings. James looked uncomfortable in the heat, tugging at his collar. And Mason, my beloved grandson in his cap and gown, sitting with the other graduates, kept glancing nervously at his mother. The commencement address droned on, but I barely heard it. My focus remained on the three people who had broken my heart time and again. What would their faces reveal when they finally saw me? Anger? Embarrassment? Or perhaps, though I hardly dared hope, remorse? As the university president began introducing special guests, I saw Victoria scan the stage, her eyes passing over me without recognition. It had been nearly 2 years since we'd seen each other, the last family Christmas I'd been invited to attend. I'd lost weight since then, changed my hairstyle, upgraded my wardrobe, small changes that added up to a woman who looked nothing like the dowdy grandmother they'd pushed aside. "Before we begin conferring degrees," William announced, "I have a special announcement. Today marks a historic moment for our university." Victoria's attention remained on her phone. James stifled a yawn. "For the past 7 years, an anonymous donor has funded scholarships for deserving students who otherwise couldn't afford to attend our institution. This same benefactor recently provided the $12 million gift that made our new science building possible." Now I had their attention. Like everyone else in the audience, they leaned forward, curious. Today, This generous individual has chosen to reveal her identity. William turned to me with a warm smile. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing Mrs. Evelyn Harrington. I rose from my seat as applause erupted across the quad. Cameras flashed. The crowd's reaction washed over me in waves, but I registered none of it. My eyes were fixed on my family's faces. James's jaw had dropped, his complexion ashen. Victoria sat frozen, her perfectly manicured hand suspended in midair. And Mason, my sweet Mason, looked utterly bewildered, his eyes darting between me and his parents. William guided me to the podium. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the microphone. "Thank you for this kind welcome," I began, my southern accent more pronounced under stress. "Many of you don't know me. Some thought they did, but were mistaken." My gaze found Victoria's, holding it steady. After my husband Harold passed away 25 years ago, I made 2 promises: to ensure his legacy would help others, and to never let anyone make me feel small again. I could see Victoria whispering frantically to James, who looked shell-shocked. "I stand before you not just as a donor, but as a reminder that we should never judge people by appearances, by age, or by the softness of their voice. Sometimes, the person you've underestimated is the very one holding the key to your future." As William presented me with a ceremonial plaque, I caught Mason's eye. The confusion in his face had transformed into something else, a dawning realization, perhaps, of all he'd never known about his grandmother. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt a flicker of hope. The truth was finally out. Now we would see what they would do with it. The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes, congratulations, and camera flashes. Faculty members who had never given me a second glance now clustered around, eager to express their gratitude. Parents approached with tears in their eyes, telling me how their children wouldn't be graduating today without my scholarships. Through it all, I maintained the gracious smile I'd perfected over decades of nursing. Professional, warm, revealing nothing of the storm inside me. William Foster remained protectively at my side, skillfully running interference when the attention became overwhelming. Olivia hovered nearby, occasionally shooting daggers with her eyes toward Victoria, who had not moved from her seat despite the ceremony's conclusion. "Your family hasn't approached," William noted quietly as the crowd began to disperse. "They will," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Victoria's calculating her next move. James is waiting for her instructions. And Mason..." I paused, searching the sea of graduation caps for my grandson. Mason is confused. As if summoned by my words, I spotted him pushing through the crowd, still in his academic regalia, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something else. Anger? Wonder? I couldn't tell. "Grandma?" he said when he reached me, his voice cracking slightly. He looked so much like Harold in that moment, the same questioning tilt of the head, the same crease between his eyebrows. "Hello, Mason," I replied softly. "Congratulations on your graduation." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. In many ways, he was. You're the anonymous donor everyone's been talking about? The one who built the new science building?" I nodded, watching emotions flicker across his face. "But how? Dad always said you were struggling on your pension. That's why we..." He stopped abruptly, color rising in his cheeks. "That's why you what, Mason?" I prompted gently. "Why you stopped inviting me to holidays. Why your mother suggested I was a burden. Why you told me not to come today." His eyes dropped to the ground. It wasn't my idea to text you. Mom said..." "Mason!" Victoria's sharp voice cut through the air as she approached, James trailing behind her like a shadow. Her smile was brittle, her eyes cold as winter. "There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you." She turned to me, composing her features into an expression of delighted surprise. "Evelyn, what an incredible secret you've been keeping. We had no idea you were here, or that you were so involved with the university." The brazen lie nearly took my breath away. I'd known Victoria was calculating, but this level of falsehood, spoken so smoothly, so publicly, stunned me. "Didn't you?" I replied, keeping my voice light. How strange, considering Mason texted me yesterday after I'd already traveled 16 hours to be here. He specifically mentioned that I wasn't welcome at his graduation. "On your instructions, Victoria." James stepped forward, his face ashen. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, finally allowing some of my pain to show. I have the text messages, James, just as I have every excuse for why I couldn't visit at Christmas, every canceled dinner, every time you've allowed your wife to push me further from your lives. Victoria's perfect facade cracked slightly. This is hardly the place. It's exactly the place, I countered. For 7 years, I've funded scholarships at this university. I donated $12 million for the science building, and I did it all anonymously because I wanted Mason to succeed on his own merits, not because his grandmother was a major benefactor. I turned to my grandson, whose face had drained of color. I never wanted special treatment for you, Mason, just the opportunity to be part of your life, to see you grow into the remarkable young man you've become. Mrs. Harrington, William interjected smoothly, the board is waiting to take you to lunch, shall we? I nodded gratefully. Mason, I'm staying at the Ritz-Carlton, room 7112. If you'd like to talk, really talk, I'll be there this evening. As I turned to leave with William and Olivia, Victoria grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Her voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for me. You think you've won something here? You've just destroyed your relationship with your son. James will never forgive this public humiliation. I gently but firmly removed her hand. No, Victoria, you destroyed that relationship years ago. I'm simply refusing to pretend anymore. The university's black town car waited at the curb. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of my family through the window. Victoria gesturing angrily, James looking defeated, and Mason standing apart from them both, staring after our departing vehicle. Are you all right? Olivia asked, taking my trembling hand. I wasn't all right. I felt simultaneously hollowed out and overflowing, with grief, with righteous anger, with the terrifying exhilaration of finally speaking my truth. I don't know, I answered honestly. But for the first time in years, I feel real. William studied me with concern. What happens now, Evelyn? I gazed out at the Boston skyline, buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. Now we wait. The ball is in their court. But even as I said it, I wondered if I'd just shattered what remained of my family beyond repair. Had standing up for myself cost me the very relationships I'd hoped to save? Only time would tell. And for once, I wasn't the one who needed to make the next move. The Ritz-Carlton's restaurant hummed with lunchtime conversation as William, Olivia, and several board members raised glasses to toast the university's most generous benefactor. I smiled and nodded, playing my part while my mind remained fixed on the confrontation at the graduation ceremony. To Evelyn Harrington, said Dr. Reynolds, the board chairwoman, whose generosity will impact generations of students, and who gives one hell of a graduation surprise, added Professor Martinez, triggering appreciative laughter around the table. Only Olivia noticed my distraction. They'll come around, she whispered as the others fell into conversation about expansion plans. Or they won't. Either way, you've done the right thing. Had I? The question haunted me throughout the elaborate meal. Standing up for myself felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying, like stepping off a precipice with no certainty of what awaited below. Midway through dessert, my phone vibrated. A text from Mason. I'll come by your hotel at 7. Alone. Those 2 words, alone, sent a flutter of hope through my chest. Perhaps there was a chance to salvage something after all. By 6:30, I was pacing my suite, rehearsing what I might say. The knock came precisely at 7 o'clock, always punctual, my Mason, even as a child. When I opened the door, the sight of him nearly broke my heart. He'd changed out of his graduation attire into jeans and a button-down shirt, looking young and vulnerable. His eyes were red-rimmed. Come in, I said softly, stepping aside. He entered cautiously, taking in the luxury suite with widened eyes. This is different from the Holiday Inn where you usually stay. I usually stay where I can afford to be seen staying, I replied. There's a difference. Mason perched awkwardly on the edge of an armchair. Why didn't you tell us? About the money, the donations, any of it? I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. Would it have changed how your mother treated me? His gaze dropped to the floor. Maybe. No, I said gently. It would only have changed the nature of her interest in me. Victoria doesn't value people, Mason. She values what they can provide her. Status, connections, advantages. That's not fair, he protested but weakly. What's not fair was watching my only grandson pull away from me year by year. What's not fair was being uninvited to Christmas dinner because Victoria's socialite friends were coming and my presence might embarrass her. What's not fair was traveling 16 hours by bus to attend your graduation, only to be told I wasn't welcome. "I'm sorry about the text," he said, his voice small. "Mom said you'd understand, that you wouldn't want to make a scene." I leaned forward. "Did you ever wonder why you were given a full scholarship to attend university? Why you received that anonymous stipend each semester for books and living expenses?" His head snapped up, eyes widening. "That was you? Dad said it was based on my grades." "Your grades were excellent," I acknowledged, "but the financial support came from me. I wanted to give you every opportunity without creating an obligation, without you feeling that you owed me anything. But why keep it secret? Why live in that small house, drive that old car, when you could afford—" He gestured around the luxurious suite. "After your grandfather died, I discovered something important about people. When they think you have nothing to offer, they show you exactly who they are." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Your mother decided I was worthless because I lacked money and connections. Your father allowed it because standing up to her was too difficult." "And me?" Mason asked, his voice cracking. "What did I do?" The question pierced me. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "You were a child, caught in the middle. But Mason, you're not a child anymore. Today's text message was a choice." Tears spilled down his cheeks. "I didn't know what to do. Mom was so insistent. She said you'd try to make my graduation about yourself, that you'd embarrass me in front of my friends." "And did I?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, you looked different up there, powerful, like someone I didn't know at all. I'm still the same grandmother who baked you chocolate chip cookies and taught you to fish at Lake Charleston. The woman who bandaged your knees when you fell and read you stories until you fell asleep." I squeezed his hand. "I just refused to be invisible anymore." Mason wiped his eyes with his sleeve, looking suddenly younger than his 22 years. "Dad and Mom are fighting. I've never seen Dad stand up to her like this before. He's furious about the text, says he never knew. Mom says he's lying, that he knew everything." "And what do you believe?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know anymore. Everything I thought I knew about our family feels like a lie." "Not everything," I said firmly. "Never doubt that I love you, Mason. That has always been true, even when you pushed me away." From my purse, I retrieved the small gift box containing Harold's watch. "This was meant for you today. Your grandfather wore it every day of our marriage." Mason opened the box with trembling fingers, running his thumb over the inscription. "Time reveals truth. Choose wisely how you spend it," he read aloud. "Harold was a wise man," I said softly. "He understood something that took me far too long to learn, that our time is precious, and we should never waste it trying to please those who cannot see our worth." Mason slipped the watch onto his wrist, its vintage gold face contrasting with his youth. "I don't know what happens next, Grandma." I smiled sadly. "Neither do I. But for the first time in years, I feel like we have a chance at honesty, and that's a start." As he left, promising to return tomorrow, I stood at the window watching Boston's lights flicker on across the darkening sky. The confrontation I dreaded for so long had come and gone, leaving devastation in its wake. But also, perhaps, the first fragile seeds of something new. I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for revenge or vindication, but for the simple blessing of being seen, of mattering, of finally standing in my truth, whatever consequences might follow. Morning sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains I'd forgotten to close. I'd slept fitfully, my conversation with Mason playing on repeat through my dreams. My phone showed 3 missed calls from James and a text, "We need to talk," coming by at 10. I ordered room service, a luxury I rarely allowed myself despite my wealth, and prepared for another confrontation. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow. Straighter posture, clearer eyes. The weight of secrets finally lifted from her shoulders. At precisely 10 o'clock, a sharp knock echoed through the suite. James stood in the hallway, his appearance shocking me. My always immaculate son looked like he hadn't slept, hair uncombed, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled. "May I come in?" he asked formally, as if speaking to a stranger. I stepped aside, noticing how he surveyed the luxurious suite with the same disbelief Mason had shown. We sat in uncomfortable silence until I finally spoke. How long have you known Victoria was pushing me out of your lives? My directness seemed to startle him. James flinched. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I countered. The question is whether you were complicit or merely oblivious. Mom, please. I sat alone on holidays while you celebrated with Victoria's family. I received last-minute cancellations for dinners I'd spent days preparing. I watched my grandson's love turn to disinterest under her influence. And you allowed it all. James ran his hands through his disheveled hair. Victoria convinced me you were happier with your nursing friends, that family gatherings stressed you out, that you didn't really want to be included, but felt obligated. He looked up, his face crumpling. I believed her because it was easier than seeing the truth. The admission hung between us, inadequate, yet somehow brave in its honesty. When did you learn about the money? I asked. Not until yesterday. He shook his head in disbelief. All these years, I thought you were struggling. I even sent money to your church pastor once, anonymously, asking him to help you with your heating bill. Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Reverend Michaels, he told me a generous parishioner was covering utilities for several elderly members. I doubled my usual donation that month to help others. James looked stricken. Why didn't you tell me? About the investments, the properties, any of it? I studied my son's face, Harold's eyes looking back at me, searching for answers. Would it have changed anything? Would you have stood up to Victoria sooner? Been prouder to introduce me to your friends? His silence was answer enough. After your father died, I discovered something terrible about wealth, I continued. It changes how people see you. Suddenly, everyone wants your time, your attention, your resources. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my bank account. I paused, and clearly I wasn't. James flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair, isn't it? Mason told me about your fight with Victoria. He said you claimed you never knew about the text message. I didn't, James protested. I would never have allowed that. I may have been weak, but I wouldn't have kept you from his graduation. I studied him carefully. Victoria says otherwise. Victoria says whatever serves her purpose. Bitterness edged his voice. I spent the night in a hotel. I don't know what we are right now. A knock interrupted us. Opening the door revealed Olivia, who took one look at James and raised an eyebrow at me. Should I come back later? She asked. No, stay, I replied, grateful for her steadying presence. James, you remember my friend Olivia? He nodded uncomfortably. From the graduation. And Thanksgiving, years ago? The Thanksgiving where your wife mentioned my quaint little nursing career and suggested Evie and I must find it intimidating to dine with people of your social standing? Olivia's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Yes, that's the one. James had the grace to look ashamed. I never should have allowed her to speak to either of you that way. No, Olivia agreed pleasantly. You shouldn't have. I interrupted before she could continue. Olivia's protective instincts were admirable, but not helpful at this moment. What happens now, James? He looked lost. A successful architect who designed flawless structures but couldn't blueprint his own life. I don't know. Victoria's furious about the public embarrassment. She says you planned this to humiliate her. I plan to attend my grandson's graduation and announce a donation I'm proud of, I corrected. Victoria created the humiliation when she decided I wasn't worthy of sitting in the audience. James nodded slowly. Mason stayed with me last night at the hotel. He showed me the watch, Dad's watch. It was always meant for him. He's confused and angry at all of us. James looked up, his eyes suddenly vulnerable. He keeps asking why I never told him about you, the real you. He feels like we've all been lying to him. We have, I said gently. You and Victoria by omission and control. Me by hiding who I really am. We all failed him in different ways. James stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the Boston skyline. I don't know if my marriage will survive this. The statement hung in the air, neither a question nor a plea for advice, simply a recognition of reality. That's between you and Victoria, I replied. My concern is rebuilding a relationship with my grandson, and perhaps, I added softly, with my son. He turned, his expression raw with emotion. After everything I've allowed, how can you even want that? Because you're my child, I said simply, and because you're finally seeing clearly. That's a start. Olivia touched my shoulder supportively as James wiped unexpected tears from his eyes. I have a foundation board meeting this afternoon, I told him, but I'd like to have dinner with you and Mason tonight. Just the three of us. James nodded, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years, softening his face. I'd like that too, Mom. After he left, Olivia poured us both coffee from the room service tray. Well, she said with characteristic bluntness, that was 25 years overdue. I sipped the rich coffee, feeling oddly light despite the emotional morning. Better late than never, I replied. God's timing is rarely our own. Speaking of timing, Olivia said, checking her watch, we should head to your meeting. The foundation won't run itself. As we gathered our things, I paused at the mirror one last time. The woman reflected there wasn't just a nurse, a widow, a mother, or a wealthy benefactor. She was all of these things, and more, finally visible in the fullness of her being. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The Harvard Medical School conference room fell silent as I finished presenting my proposal. 12 faces around the polished table stared back at me, some intrigued, others skeptical. Let me make sure I understand, said Dr. Eleanor Simmons, the Dean of Admissions. You want to establish a scholarship specifically for older adults entering nursing programs, starting at age 50? Precisely, I confirmed. The Harrington Second Chance Nursing Scholarship, for those who've spent their lives caring for others and now wish to formalize that calling. It's unconventional, noted another board member. So am I replied with a smile. At 71, I've learned that conventional thinking rarely changes the world. William Foster, who had accompanied me to lend support, leaned forward. Evelyn's foundation has already transformed educational access at Boston University. Her vision for expanding healthcare education deserves serious consideration. The discussion continued for another hour. Questions about logistics, funding mechanisms, selection criteria. I answered each with the precision I'd once used to administer medications. By the time we concluded, even the skeptics were nodding thoughtfully. We'll need to review the financial details, said Dr. Simmons, but I believe we can make this work. The world needs more nurses, especially those with life experience. As we left the building, William checked his watch. That gives you 3 hours before your dinner with James and Mason. Shall we celebrate with tea at the public garden? The Boston Public Garden bloomed with summer flowers, families strolling along paths, while swan boats glided across the pond. William and I found a bench in a quiet corner. You're doing remarkable things, Evelyn, he said, his voice warm with admiration. Using your wealth not just for buildings, but to change lives. I watched a young mother help her toddler feed the ducks. When Harold died, I felt invisible. Just another widow navigating grief alone. The investments were initially about security, ensuring I'd never be dependent on James or anyone else. And now, I smiled. Now it's about legacy, not just buildings with my name on them, but opportunities for people society often overlooks. Older students, single parents, those seeking second chances. William's hand covered mine briefly, a gesture of understanding rather than romance. We'd developed a comfortable friendship over the years, bound by shared goals rather than personal entanglements. What about your personal legacy? He asked gently. With your family? The question sobered me. That remains to be seen. Tonight's dinner will tell me a lot. My phone chimed with a text from Olivia. Victoria just stormed into the hotel lobby demanding your room number. Front desk refused per my instructions. Heads up, hurricane approaching. I sighed, showing William the message. I should go. The eye of the storm usually follows me these days. When I returned to the Ritz, Olivia was waiting in my suite, looking grimly satisfied. Victoria made quite a scene, threatened to call her friends on the board to have staff fired. Did she leave? Eventually, but not before announcing to anyone who would listen that you're a manipulative old woman who's trying to buy her son's affection. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Perhaps she's right. Evelyn Harrington, Olivia's voice sharpened. Don't you dare. That woman has spent years systematically cutting you out of your family's life. She doesn't get to rewrite history now that the truth is out. I knew she was right, but doubt still nagged at me. Was I any better than Victoria, using wealth and influence to reclaim my place in my family's life? A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Opening the door revealed Mason, alone and earlier than expected. I hope it's okay, he said hesitantly. Dad's running late. He's meeting with his lawyer. I ushered him in as Olivia made a discreet exit, promising to call later. Mason looked better than yesterday, less shell-shocked, though still guarded. Your father's lawyer? I asked. concern rising. Is everything all right? Mason shrugged uncomfortably. Mom's threatening to divorce him if he doesn't get control of the situation. Her words, not mine. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Despite everything, I never wanted to cause problems in your parents' marriage. It's not your fault. Mason's voice hardened. I've been thinking about everything, remembering things differently. Like how Mom always had an excuse why we couldn't visit you, or how she'd roll her eyes whenever Dad mentioned your name. He paced the room, energy radiating from his tall frame. She told me you couldn't afford to contribute to my education, that asking you for help would be a burden, all while you were secretly funding everything. I wanted to give you opportunities without strings attached, I explained, without Victoria feeling obligated or resentful. But why? Mason stopped pacing, his expression pained. Why let her push you away? Why live so modestly when you didn't have to? Why hide who you really are? The questions tumbled out, a lifetime of confusion seeking answers. I patted the sofa beside me, and he reluctantly sat down. After your grandfather died, I discovered something about money, I began. It changes people, how they see you, what they expect from you. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my bank account. I smiled sadly, and I learned that sometimes, when you show people who you really are, they don't actually want to see. So you just disappeared into the background? Let Mom treat you like you didn't matter? I made choices I thought would keep peace in your family, I admitted. I believed staying connected to you in any way was better than forcing your parents to choose sides. I was wrong. Mason studied his grandfather's watch on his wrist. I keep thinking about all the times you tried to be part of my life and how I just let you fade away, especially these last few years. You were finding your own path, I said gently. That's what young people do. No, he shook his head firmly. I bought into Mom's narrative that you were just a simple, outdated woman with nothing to offer my future. I'm ashamed of that now. The raw honesty in his voice moved me deeply. Before I could respond, another knock announced James's arrival. As I opened the door, the strain on my son's face told me everything I needed to know about his afternoon. Victoria's filed for separation, he said without preamble, and she's freezing our joint accounts. I nodded calmly. Then I think we have much to discuss over dinner. As I gathered my purse, I caught Mason watching me with new eyes, seeing not just his grandmother, but a woman of strength and substance. Perhaps that alone made everything worthwhile. The restaurant James had chosen overlooked Boston Harbor, its elegant interior dimly lit and intimate. As we were seated at a corner table, I noticed how both James and Mason watched me, still adjusting to this new version of Evelyn Harrington, who moved confidently through spaces they'd never imagined I'd frequent. I took the liberty of ordering wine, James said as the waiter approached. Unless you'd prefer something else? Wine is perfect, I replied, noting his surprise. Another assumption challenged that his mother only drank sweet tea or perhaps sherry on special occasions. After we ordered, an awkward silence fell. So many questions hung in the air, so many years of misunderstandings to untangle. Finally, Mason spoke. So, you're rich. The bluntness made James wince, but I smiled. I'm comfortable, I corrected. Your grandfather left me well insured, and I made some smart investments at the right time. Mom said you were barely getting by on your nurse's pension, James interjected. That's why he trailed off, embarrassed. Why you felt obligated to invite me for holidays but relieved when I declined. I finished for him. Why Victoria suggested I couldn't possibly contribute to Mason's education. James flushed. I should have questioned her more, should have seen what was happening. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. The waiter delivered our appetizers, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. I watched my son and grandson, the two men I loved most in this world, struggling to reconcile the mother and grandmother they thought they knew with the woman sitting before them. When did it start? Mason asked. The investments? The donations? I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. About 3 years after your grandfather died. I was still nursing then, working the night shift at Charleston Memorial. One of my patients was a retired investment banker with pancreatic cancer. Both men listened intently as I continued. Herbert Patterson, ornery old man who refused to let anyone but me change his IV. We got to talking during those long nights. When he learned I had some money from Harold's insurance, but no idea how to grow it, he made it his mission to educate me before he died. And he taught you to invest? James asked. I nodded. First in conservative blue-chip stocks, then gradually in commercial real estate. By the time he passed, I had a solid foundation. From there, I built slowly but steadily. Why keep it secret, though? Mason pressed. Especially from us? I set down my fork, choosing my words carefully. At first, it was simply private, something that belonged just to me after losing Harold. Then, as my portfolio grew, I noticed how differently people treated me when they discovered I had means. Like how? James asked. Suddenly, church committees wanted my input. Neighbors sought investment advice. Distant relatives reappeared. I shook my head. But most tellingly, my opinion began to matter in conversations where I'd previously been invisible. Understanding dawned in James's eyes. And by then, Victoria had already established how our family dynamic would work. Yes, I acknowledged. She'd made it clear that I was to be tolerated, not integrated. That my ideas, my background, my very presence was somehow embarrassing. Mom, James started, but I held up my hand. I'm not asking for your defense or apology right now, James. I'm answering Mason's question about why I kept my financial situation private. I turned back to my grandson. And then there was you. Me? Mason looked startled. I wanted you to have every advantage, but I never wanted you to see me as a resource rather than a grandmother. I didn't want your parents, particularly Victoria, to feel obligated to include me because of what I could provide. So I created the Anonymous Scholarship Fund at Boston University, specifically structured so you would qualify. Mason's eyes widened. The merit scholarship was from you? All along? I nodded. Among other things. James set down his glass with a thunk. The Christmas bonuses at my firm these past 5 years. The mysterious client who commissioned that major library project that saved us during the recession. His voice rose in disbelief. Was that all you? The world works in mysterious ways, I replied, unable to suppress a small smile. My God, James whispered. All this time you've been silently supporting us, while Victoria treated you like a burden, I finished. Yes. Mason leaned forward, his expression intense. But why endure it? Why not just tell us the truth? Hey everyone, I really appreciate you following my story. Could you take a quick second to subscribe to our channel? I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop it in the comments below. Now, back to this dinner that was decades overdue. I considered his question carefully before answering. Pride partially, stubbornness certainly, traits your grandfather would confirm I possess in abundance. But mostly, I paused, finding the painful truth. Mostly fear. Fear that if I revealed my financial status and you still rejected me, I'd have no illusions left to comfort me. No way to pretend it was about money rather than me. The raw admission hung in the air. James reached across the table and took my hand. The first time he'd initiated physical contact in years. I've failed you, he said simply. As a son, I've failed spectacularly. We both have, Mason added, his young face solemn. But what happens now? With Dad and Mom separating, with everything out in the open? That depends on what you both want, I replied. I've shown you who I really am. The question is whether you want that person in your lives. I do, James said immediately. I want to know my mother, all of her, not just the version Victoria found acceptable. Mason nodded in agreement. Me too. But, he hesitated. What about Mom? What happens with her? James sighed heavily. Your mother has made her position clear. She feels betrayed and humiliated. She's demanding I choose between you, Mom, and her. And what will you choose? I asked quietly. My son straightened his shoulders, looking suddenly more like Harold than I'd ever noticed before. I'm done choosing Victoria's comfort over everyone else's reality. I should have stood up to her years ago. As our main courses arrived, the conversation shifted to more immediate concerns. James's legal situation, Mason's post-graduation plans, my foundation work. For the first time in decades, we spoke openly, honestly, without the shadow of Victoria's disapproval or the weight of unspoken truths. When dessert arrived, Mason raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. To new beginnings, he said, and to finally getting to know my remarkable grandmother. James joined the toast, his eyes bright with emotion. To family, the real kind, built on truth and acceptance. As I raised my glass to meet theirs, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Victoria wouldn't surrender her influence without a fight. Years of habit and misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single dinner. But for the first time since Harold died, I felt truly seen by my family, and that was worth more than all my investments combined. The next morning brought rain to Boston, heavy drops pelting against my hotel window as I sipped coffee and watched the gray city come alive. My phone had been unusually active. 3 missed calls from Victoria, a text from James saying he'd moved his things to a long-stay hotel, and a message from Mason asking if we could meet for lunch. I was responding to Mason when an incoming call interrupted me. Olivia, her voice tense. Victoria's in the lobby again, and she's not alone. She's brought some society reporter from the Boston Chronicle. My stomach tightened. What does she want? Apparently, to expose how you've been manipulating the family through financial control. Her words, not mine. The manager's stalling them, but they're making a scene. I closed my eyes briefly, gathering strength. Tell them I'll meet them in the hotel restaurant in 15 minutes. Evie, are you sure that's wise? No, I admitted, but hiding will only make her narrative stronger. I dressed carefully, not in the expensive cream suit from graduation, but in a simple blue dress I'd owned for years. No designer labels, no flashy accessories, just the pearl earrings Harold had given me on our 25th anniversary and his mother's cameo at my throat. Victoria spotted me the moment I entered the restaurant, her perfect blonde hair and tailored pantsuit a stark contrast to my deliberate simplicity. Beside her sat a young woman with a digital recorder and an eager expression. The reporter, presumably. Mrs. Harrington, Victoria began loudly as I approached. How convenient that you're finally willing to speak with family. You've been remarkably accessible to university presidents and foundation boards, but not to your daughter-in-law. Several nearby diners glanced our way. I sat down calmly, folding my hands on the table. Good morning, Victoria. I don't believe I know your companion. I'm Melissa Chen, Boston Chronicle. The young woman introduced herself. I'm writing a piece on family dynamics and wealth disparities. Mrs. Bradshaw has shared some fascinating insights about your recent emergence. Has she indeed? I signaled a waiter. I'll have tea, please. Earl Grey if you have it. Victoria's perfect features tightened with irritation at my composure. Don't pretend this is a social call, Evelyn. You've systematically undermined my family, and now you're using your money to turn my husband and son against me. The reporter's fingers hovered eagerly over her device, waiting for conflict to erupt. I studied Victoria. Her flawless makeup couldn't quite conceal the redness around her eyes or the tension in her jaw. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion. She was fighting for her world the only way she knew how. Ms. Chen, I said, turning to the reporter. Before we continue, I'd like to clarify something. Are you here to interview me about my charitable foundation? About educational access for underserved populations? Or are you here because my daughter-in-law promised you a sensational story about family drama? The young woman blinked, caught off guard by my directness. Well, because if it's the latter, I continued gently, I'm afraid you've wasted your morning. I don't discuss private family matters with the press. This isn't private, Victoria hissed. You humiliated me publicly at Mason's graduation. You've been secretly controlling my family's finances for years. I waited while the waiter set down my tea, thanking him before responding. Supporting is not controlling, Victoria. There's a difference. You funded James's business during the recession, she accused, without telling us it was you. Yes, I acknowledged, because my son needed help, and accepting it from his simple, struggling mother-in-law would have been impossible for you to bear. Victoria flushed. You've made me look like a monster to my own family. No, I said quietly. Your actions have done that quite effectively without my assistance. The reporter was scribbling notes rapidly now, glancing between us with poorly concealed fascination. I turned to her again. Ms. Chen, may I suggest a more interesting story than family disagreements? The Harrington Foundation is launching a scholarship program for older adults entering nursing, people who've spent decades in unpaid caregiving roles and now wish to formalize their skills. That's a narrative with social relevance. To my surprise, interest flickered in the young woman's eyes. Actually, that does sound compelling. Would you be willing to discuss it on record? Victoria's face contorted with fury. This interview is about whatever Mrs. Harrington wishes to discuss, the reporter interrupted, her professional curiosity clearly shifting. Family drama is common. Philanthropic innovation is newsworthy? I suppressed a smile as Victoria stood abruptly, grabbing her designer purse. This is precisely what she does. Redirects, manipulates, presents herself as saintly while destroying families. You're all falling for it. As she stormed out, several diners watched with raised eyebrows. The reporter turned back to me, somewhat apologetically. I'm sorry about that. She approached me with promises of an exclusive about toxic financial manipulation in wealthy families. And instead, you found a grandmother funding nursing scholarships, I observed wryly. Life is full of disappointments. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing the foundation, my vision for supporting mature students, and the importance of valuing caregiving experience. By the time we finished, Ms. Chen had a completely different story than the one Victoria had promised, and seemed genuinely pleased about it. As she gathered her things to leave, the reporter hesitated. Off the record, your daughter-in-law mentioned some accusations about your relationship with Dr. Foster at Boston University. Implied there was something improper about your donations? I sighed, unsurprised by Victoria's tactics. William Foster is a respected educator and a valued friend who shares my commitment to educational access. There's nothing more to the relationship, though I suspect that disappoints your journalistic instincts. She had the grace to look embarrassed. Sometimes the simple truth is less interesting than speculation, but infinitely more valuable, I replied. After she left, I remained at the table, my tea gone cold, as I contemplated Victoria's desperation. She was losing control of the narrative she'd carefully constructed, of herself as the sophisticated matriarch, of me as the simple, burdensome mother-in-law, of James as the devoted husband who prioritized her wishes above all. My phone buzzed with a text from Mason. Still on for lunch? Dad wants to join us. I smiled as I typed my reply. Absolutely. And please tell your father his wife just tried to have me featured in the society pages as a manipulative villain. His response came quickly. Too late. You've already been cast as the hero in our story. See you at 12:30. As I left the restaurant, I said a silent prayer, not for victory in this painful family struggle, but for healing, for Victoria to find peace that didn't depend on control, for James to maintain his newfound courage, for Mason to forge his own path. And for myself, simply the wisdom to use the blessings God had given me to create something meaningful from the ashes of what had been broken. Before we get to our final chapter, I'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm curious to know how old you are. Drop your age in the comments below. Every story has its conclusion, and mine is just around the corner. 3 months after Mason's graduation, I stood on the wide porch of my Charleston home, watching the moving truck pull into the driveway. Not the modest bungalow where I'd lived for 40 years, I'd sold that in July, but the gracious historic house on Battery Street I'd secretly owned for a decade and rented to tourists. Now it was truly mine, filled with carefully selected furnishings and Harold's restored antiques from storage. Still can't believe you owned this place all along, James said, joining me with 2 glasses of sweet tea. I must have walked past it 100 times, never knowing. I accepted the glass with a smile. It needed extensive renovation. The rental income covered the costs, and then some. Smart investment, he noted, like everything else you've done. The moving truck's back door rolled up, revealing furniture I recognized. Mason's childhood desk, James's books, family photo albums rescued from the home Victoria now occupied alone. The divorce proceedings had begun, but weren't finalized. Victoria had hired an aggressive attorney and was demanding half of James's business assets, unaware that his most lucrative projects had been anonymously funded by me. The legal complexity would take months to untangle. Mason bounded up the porch steps, his energy filling the space as always. At 22, he radiated possibility. Grandma, the movers need to know where to put Dad's drafting table. The sunroom, I decided. The light is perfect there. As Mason relayed the instructions, I studied my son and grandson, the 2 men who had temporarily moved into my new home while they rebuilt their lives. James was slowly finding his footing after 23 years of marriage to Victoria. Mason was preparing for graduate school, having decided to combine his economics degree with public health, inspired by my grandmother's foundation work, as he'd written in his application essay. Olivia arrived as the last boxes were being unloaded, carrying a housewarming plant and her signature blunt perspective. So the prodigal son and grandson return, she observed, setting down a flourishing peace lily. Better late than never. Olivia, I warned gently. But James laughed. She's right, Mom. We are the prodigals, and you've welcomed us with open arms despite everything. Family is family, I said simply, even when it's complicated. We settled in the parlor as afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows. This room had once hosted Charleston society a century ago. Now it witnessed a different kind of restoration, not of architecture, but of relationships. I had a call from the foundation director this morning, I told them. Our first class of second chance nursing scholars has been selected. 27 students over 50, most of them women who raised families or cared for elderly parents and never had the opportunity for formal education. That's incredible, Mason said. Will you meet them? Next month at the orientation. Each one has a story worth hearing. James studied me thoughtfully. You've built something remarkable, Mom. Not just the financial portfolio, but this legacy of second chances. Speaking of which, Mason interjected, I saw Mom yesterday. The room quieted. Victoria remained a charged subject, despite our efforts to maintain civility. How is she? I asked carefully. Mason shrugged. Angry? Hurt? Convinced this is all an elaborate scheme you orchestrated to steal her family. And what do you think? I asked. His young face turned serious. I think she created a narrative years ago about who you were, who we all were, and can't accept that it wasn't reality. She's lost everything that defined her, I said softly. Her social position, her control over the family, her certainty about her place in the world. That's not easy for anyone. James looked surprised by my compassion. After how she treated you, you can still find empathy for her? I sipped my tea, considering. Holding on to bitterness only poisons your own heart. Victoria made choices based on values I don't share, but I understand the fear behind them. Fear? Mason questioned. Fear of insignificance, of being overlooked, of losing status. I set down my glass. The same fears that kept me hiding my success for so many years, just from the opposite direction. A thoughtful silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of the movers finishing their work. Outside, Charleston continued its unhurried pace, palm trees swaying in the afternoon breeze, horse-drawn carriages carrying tourists along cobblestone streets. I've been thinking about Grandpa's watch, Mason said suddenly. The inscription about time revealing truth. Your grandfather was a wise man, I smiled. He also wrote something else, Mason continued. Inside that journal you gave me last week, his old one from the war, there's an inscription that says, the greatest wealth is family who sees you truly and loves you anyway. Tears sprang unexpectedly to my eyes. I hadn't read Harold's journals in years, had forgotten that particular inscription. He wrote that after his mother finally accepted me, I explained, my voice thick with emotion. I came from nothing. No family connections, no money, just a nursing student with ambition. His mother thought he could do better. It took years before she saw me, really saw me. Like us, James said quietly. It took us too long to see you, Mom. Really see you. I reached out, taking my son's hand in my right and my grandson's in my left. But you see me now, and I see you both, not just the roles you play or the mistakes you've made, but who you truly are. And who is that? Mason asked, his young face earnest. Good men finding their way, I said simply. Men of character who can admit when they've been wrong and have the courage to begin again, just as your grandfather would have wanted. Outside, the moving truck pulled away. The three of us moved to the porch to watch the sunset paint Charleston's historic skyline in gold and pink. This new chapter wouldn't be perfect. Victoria's anger would continue to cast shadows. Rebuilding trust would take time. Old habits would need constant vigilance. But as we stood together, 3 generations linked by blood and newfound understanding, I felt a sense of completion. The invisible woman had finally been seen. The silent benefactor had found her voice. The patient grandmother had reclaimed her place. God's timing is perfect, I murmured, even when we don't understand the weight. James put his arm around my shoulders as Mason leaned against the porch railing, his grandfather's watch catching the fading light. To new beginnings, my son said softly. And to truth, my grandson added. To both, I agreed, my heart full as the day gently surrendered to evening. To truth that leads to new beginnings, and the courage to embrace them.